Deep beneath the earth, forgotten mines and sealed chambers have been hiding disturbing secrets for centuries. Mass graves sealed in darkness, bodies preserved exactly as they died, clues left behind by people who went underground and never returned. Some of these places remained hidden for thousands of years before anyone discovered them.
Now, this is quite a discovery. Fragments of a biblical scroll, along with other relics, have been found in desert caves in Israel.
Others were uncovered purely by accident. Here are the most horrifying discoveries ever uncovered deep inside underground mines. Let's start with something that shocked archaeologists in northern Spain. Ritual cannibalism in El Mirón Cave. A child's leg bone was found cracked open lengthwise, deliberately, so whoever was holding it could get to the marrow inside. That bone was 5,100 years old. It was found in El Mirón Cave in northern Spain, alongside the remains of 10 other people who had all been killed and eaten at the same time. The bones told the whole story, and none of it was good. Whoever killed these people also carved the flesh clean off them, and the blade marks left behind make that undeniable. Pieces were held over fire because the burn marks are right there on the bone, and then pressed directly into the surface of the bone itself are human bite marks. Not animal, human. Someone put these bones in their mouth and chewed. This wasn't an act of desperation. Evidence showed no famine and no shortage of food. All 11 died at the same time, which means this was planned. Researchers believe these were enemies, captured, killed, and consumed not just to destroy their bodies, but to obliterate their souls entirely. In some ancient belief systems, eating someone completely meant they could never exist again. Not here, and not anywhere. This cave sits in the Atapuerca region of Spain. Experts now call it the cannibalism capital of the ancient world. They found bones here with butcher marks that are nearly 1 million years old. A 2017 study confirmed a terrifying truth. This was not rare. Entire communities across Europe practiced this. They stripped the bodies, they roasted the flesh, they smashed the skulls open to use them as bowls. For these people, this was a normal way of life. They didn't see a crime. For them, it was entirely normal. And that is the part that is hardest to sit with. Roman soldiers killed by ancient chemical weapon. 19. Roman soldiers crawled into a tunnel and never came back out. What killed them wasn't a blade, and it wasn't even a person, not directly. It was the air itself. It was 256 CE, and the Sasanian Persian Empire wanted the Roman city of Dura Europos off the map. It sat on the western bank of the Euphrates in what is now Syria, and it was too strategically valuable to leave standing. So the Persians went underground, tunneling beneath the city walls to bring them down from below. The Romans felt the vibrations, understood what was happening, and sent 19 men into a counter-tunnel to stop them. Those men went in ready for a fight. What they got was something nobody had a defense against. The Persians had prepared something. They had ignited sulfur and bitumen inside the enclosed underground space, and what followed wasn't simply smoke. The burning produced sulfur dioxide, which flooded the tunnel, made contact with the moisture lining the soldiers' lungs and converted directly into acid, inside their bodies, while they were still alive. They didn't suffocate. They drowned from the inside, fully conscious, unable to stand, unable to turn around, trapped in a tunnel barely wide enough to crawl through. It would have taken several agonizing minutes to die. Their bodies stayed down there for nearly 700 years. When archaeologists excavating the site in the 1930s finally reached that tunnel, they found the 19 men exactly where they fell. Historian Simon James pieced together what happened from those excavation sketches, and what he found confirmed the trap was deliberate. The bodies had been stacked and shoved backward so the Persians could move straight through. 19 men were killed and simply stepped over. Pit of Severed Arms, Bergheim, France. At the bottom of Pit in Bergheim, France, archaeologists found severed human arms, hands and fingers, not scattered, not accidentally displaced, deliberately cut off and placed there. The site was nearly 6,000 years old, and whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. The pit, designated Pit 157, was 5 feet across and over 6 feet deep. Archaeologist Fanny Chenal of the University of Strasbourg described it as the witness of a very violent event, that took place at a specific time, which is an understated way of saying that something terrible happened here, and the evidence makes that impossible to deny. The cut marks on every bone confirmed these were deliberate amputations carried out with blades or axes. Some of the limbs belonged to a teenager. On top of the severed limbs, the bodies of 7 or more people of all ages had been stacked. One middle-aged man had his arm removed and a head wound that almost certainly killed him before anything else was done to him. But the discovery that nobody has been able to explain comes after all of that. Roughly 1,000 years later, someone came back. A single body, a woman, was placed on top of everything else in that pit. She showed no signs of trauma whatsoever. No wounds, no injuries, nothing violent. She was simply laid there, deliberately and carefully, directly above a pit filled with the severed limbs and stacked bodies of people who had died 1,000 years before her. Why someone returned to a specific site of mass violence after an entire millennium and added one careful, unharmed body to the top of it has never been explained, and the fact that they knew exactly where it was and what was already inside it might be the most unsettling detail of all. The Forbidden Sinkhole, southern Mexico. There is a sinkhole in southern Mexico that the people in nearby villages refused to go anywhere near. They called it Sac-Wayum, and for generations it carried nothing but ominous warnings and dark legends. In 2014, archaeologist Bradley Russell and his team decided to go in anyway. It became immediately clear why nobody wanted to. From the very first dive, there were skulls. Getting down wasn't simple. The team had to rappel 40 feet past enormous stalactites and long dangling tree roots just to reach the first chamber. What they found there was skulls, ribs, and long bones scattered across the floor. One skull, likely a woman's, had been deliberately flattened on top, which was a known Maya burial custom. A horseshoe-shaped jaw nearby still had every tooth perfectly intact, indicating it belonged to a young adult. The second chamber was worse, completely flooded, twice the size of the first, and darker in a way that felt different. At least 5 more skulls were down there, along with bones that had cascaded in after part of the floor above collapsed. Russell described the diving conditions as genuinely terrifying, explaining that you are crawling on your belly with your tank scraping the ceiling, and there is no surfacing if something goes wrong. His theory is that the bodies were plague victims, dropped into the sinkhole specifically so they wouldn't contaminate the water supply or spread disease to the living. But to the Maya, this place meant something far darker. Sinkholes weren't just holes in the ground, they were doorways to Xibalba, the Maya underworld, a realm ruled by death gods with names like Blood Gatherer, Pus Master, and Bone Scepter. Dropping a body in wasn't disposal, it was a direct delivery to those gods, and Sac-Wayum wasn't even the worst of it. At the sacred cenote of Chichen Itza, dredging operations recovered the bones of at least 42 children, most between 3 and 11 years old, who were thrown in alive as offerings to the rain god Chake. Some were tied up when they hit the water. The Cave of Horror, Judean Desert. Israel high in the cliffs of Israel's Judean desert sits a cave that looks like nothing from the outside. The entrance is unremarkable, the rock face ordinary. But archaeologists gave it a name that has stuck ever since they saw what was inside, the Cave of Horror. 40 people died in there, men, women and children hidden deep in its twisting low passages during the Bar Kokhba revolt between 132 and 136 CE. These were Jewish rebels and their families, and they had gone into that cave to hide from Roman forces who had set up camp directly on the cliffs above them. They were completely trapped, with soldiers overhead and no safe way out. Skeletal analysis confirms they starved to death in the dark, listening to the army above them, knowing that walking out meant crucifixion, enslavement, or immediate execution. So they stayed, and they died one by one in the cave. Alongside the bones, archaeologists found ancient scroll fragments, coins, and a Greek copy of the Book of the 12. In 2021, new fragments emerged written in Greek, but with God's name Yahweh preserved in ancient Hebrew letters. Some of the texts didn't match the Bible as we know it today, suggesting alternate versions of scripture were in active use at the time. The revolt that put them there was crushed with staggering brutality. Emperor Hadrian was so enraged that he renamed the entire province from Judea to Syria Palestina, specifically to erase any Jewish identity from the map. Ancient sources record 580,000 Jews killed in battle alone, with hundreds of thousands more lost to starvation, disease and slavery. It was, by any measure, a near genocide. The Salt Men of Iran, Doak Salt Mine. In 1993, miners working deep in the Doak Salt Mine in Iran pulled something out of the rock that stopped them cold. It looked, by every account, like a prop from a horror film. A severed human head, crusted in salt, with a full beard, a moustache, and a gold earring still hanging in place. This was the first of what would become known as the Salt Men of Iran, a collection of naturally mummified bodies preserved not through any intentional process, but simply because salt does to human flesh what nothing else can. These were miners who died in the tunnels, most of them during cave-ins, and the salt sealed them exactly as they fell. Some were found with their arms still raised, frozen mid-motion at the precise moment the rock came down on them. The most disturbing of them all is Saltman number 4, a teenage boy. His body is the best preserved of the group, and researchers found not just bone but intact organs. They also found tapeworm eggs in his digestive system, meaning shortly before he died he had eaten raw or undercooked meat. A parasite that could grow up to 35 centimeters inside the intestinal tract was living in this boy, causing malnutrition and internal damage he had no way of understanding or treating, right up until the moment the mine collapsed on top of him. Dr. Lena Strum from the University of Zurich confirmed these are the only known preserved salt mummies in the world. At least 6 complete bodies have been found, with possibly 8 total, and some date back over 10,000 years. The gold earring on the first head is its own quiet horror. Gold jewellery in ancient Iran wasn't common among the poor, meaning this man had some means. Yet he was working one of the most dangerous jobs that existed, deep underground in a tunnel that eventually killed him, which suggests that whatever wealth he had wasn't nearly enough to keep him safe. Mass grave, Faliro, Greece. In 2016, archaeologists digging near Athens at the ancient port of Faliro uncovered a mass grave that kept growing the more they dug. What had started as a known burial site expanded into something far larger and far more disturbing. When the excavation was done, they had found approximately 500 skeletons. Some were buried in jars, some were in open pits. There was even a horse buried among them. But one section of the grave stood apart from everything else. Around 80 people had been laid out together in a line. 36 of them still had iron shackles locked around their wrists. The leading theory connects these people to Cylon of Athens, a nobleman who attempted a coup around 632 BCE and failed completely. His supporters surrendered only after being promised their lives would be spared. That promise was broken. They were executed while clinging to temple altars, actively seeking divine protection in what ancient sources describe as a profound act of religious sacrilege. The man who ordered the executions was Megacles, an Athenian official who made the decision to kill them even while they held onto sacred ground. It was considered so morally and religiously unforgivable that Megacles was exiled along with his entire family, and the stain of that act followed his bloodline through Athenian politics for generations afterward, with rivals repeatedly invoking the massacre to discredit his descendants. Titanoboa Colombian coal mine. The Cerrillon coal mine in northern Colombia is one of the largest mines on Earth, covering more ground than the entire city of Washington, D.C. Most of what comes out of it is coal, but buried in its fossil layers is a record of a world so alien it barely seems real. 58 million years ago, this region was a vast swampy jungle, far hotter and wetter than anything that exists on Earth today. Giant turtles moved through it. Crocodilian creatures patrolled its rivers. Lungfish grew to 7 feet long, and moving through all of it was Titanoboa cerrillonensis, a snake more than 40 feet long and weighing over a ton. Paleontologist Jonathan Bloch described the moment he first saw its bones by saying it was like being handed a mouse skull the size of a rhinoceros and being told that's a mouse. Researchers eventually recovered over 100 vertebrae from at least 28 individual animals, and when a skull finally turned up, it gave them a clearer picture of what this thing was actually eating. Titanoboa could only have reached that size because of the heat. Snakes are cold-blooded, and body size in cold-blooded animals is directly constrained by environmental temperature. For Titanoboa to have grown that large Scientists estimate the average annual temperature of its habitat would have had to sit between 30 and 34 degrees Celsius, roughly 10 degrees warmer than the same region today. Its existence is essentially a biological thermometer for a version of Earth that no longer exists. Two sisters in a prehistoric mine, more than 6,000 years ago. Two sisters worked in a mining community in what is now the Czech Republic. When they died, they were buried in the same vertical shaft they had spent their lives working in. One laid directly on top of the other, deep underground. Their remains were first discovered around 2008 in a prehistoric mine in South Moravia, but the story returned to public attention recently when researchers published detailed facial reconstructions showing exactly what these women looked like. Archaeologist Martin Olivier of the Moravian Museum was direct about what he believed happened to them, stating they were buried in the shaft probably because they had worked there, and adding that it was entirely possible they were sacrificed or simply disposed of when they could no longer work. One of the sisters had a broken forearm that had never been properly set or allowed to heal. The bone knitted wrong, the injury was permanent, and the evidence shows she was forced to keep working regardless. Her labour was worth more than her pain. The burial contained details that have never been fully explained. A newborn baby had been placed on the older sister's chest, but genetic testing confirmed the child did not belong to her. A dog skull was found positioned near her head, with the rest of the dog's skeleton near the lower sister's body, as if the animal had been deliberately distributed between them. The Neolithic mining operations these women worked in were brutal by any measure. Miners descended narrow vertical shafts using nothing but antler picks and stone tools, working in cramped dark galleries lit only by animal fat lamps that consumed the already thin oxygen supply. Collapses, suffocation and falls were constant. The bones of Neolithic miners found across Europe show severe spinal damage, chronic joint disease and repetitive stress injuries accumulated over years of work that never stopped, even when the body was clearly breaking down. For these two sisters, the mine was their whole life, and in the end, it was their grave. 2-billion-year-old water deep in an active mine in Timmins, Ontario, geoscientists from the University of Toronto were working 2.4 kilometres underground in 2013 when their instruments picked up something that made them stop. The water seeping through the rock around them was approximately 1 billion years old. They documented it, processed it, and then kept going deeper. What they found further down was something else entirely. The water at the lower level stopped them cold. Lead researcher Oliver Waugh described the moment by saying everything about it was brand new, that they were seeing signals in every isotope they had identified that they had never encountered anywhere else on Earth. The age was confirmed by measuring the gases locked inside the water: helium, argon, neon, krypton and xenon, all of which accumulate in isolated water at measurable and predictable rates over geological time. The water is also extraordinarily salty, up to 8 times saltier than seawater. Waugh noted it wouldn't kill a person to drink it, but that it would taste absolutely disgusting. 2 billion years ago, complex life did not exist on Earth. Not animals, not plants, nothing with more than one cell. The continents looked nothing like they do today. The atmosphere had almost no oxygen in it. This water was sealed into that rock before any of that existed, and it has been sitting in total darkness ever since, completely untouched, while the entire history of life on this planet unfolded above it. And here is the part that makes this more than just a geology story. The chemistry of that water suggests it could still support microbial life right now, meaning something may have been living in it down there this entire time. That matters because Europa and Enceladus, frozen moons orbiting Jupiter and Saturn, are believed to contain vast liquid oceans sealed beneath their ice for billions of years, under conditions remarkably similar to what was found in that mine. If life can survive 2 billion years of total isolation inside Earth's crust, those moons are no longer just interesting. They become genuinely plausible, and the universe becomes a considerably more inhabited and considerably more unsettling place than we are comfortable admitting. Moaning Cave, Calaveras County, California. When gold miners discovered Moaning Cave in Calaveras County in 1851, they threw torches into the opening to measure the depth. The torches disappeared into the darkness before hitting bottom. California's first state geologist, Dr. John Trask, went in and found human bones scattered throughout. He described the scene as pretty bizarre. which turned out to be an understatement. In 1853, a group of French explorers descended 300 feet and reported seeing approximately 300 petrified bodies, some of them half embedded in stalactites that had grown around them over centuries. The skulls, they claimed, belonged to a distinct and unknown race. They brought several back to San Francisco to put on display. There is no horizontal entrance to this cave. Every person whose bones ended up inside either fell in or was thrown. Excavations have confirmed remains from at least 11 individuals, and in several spots human bones were found sealed beneath thick layers of mineral buildup, meaning people had been going in over thousands of years. 2 skeletons were found deeper in the cave than the entrance point. They had survived the fall and then crawled further in before dying, injured, in total darkness, surrounded by the bones of everyone who had fallen before them. With no exit and no light, they moved deeper anyway. Whether that was a search for a way out or simply panic cannot be known, but the image of it is difficult to shake. The cave still makes a low moaning sound as air moves through its tunnels. Locals have always said it is haunted. Given everything found inside, that is hard to argue with. The petrified miner. In 1719, miners at Sweden's Fallon mine were draining a flooded abandoned tunnel when they found a body. It had been down there for 42 years and showed virtually no decay. The clothes were intact. The face was recognisable. The hands looked as though the man had only recently stopped moving. He was identified as Fetmats Israelsson, a miner who had vanished in 1677. The woman who identified him was Margareta Olsdotter, the woman he had been engaged to marry. She was now elderly. He looked exactly as she remembered him. When the body was brought to the surface, it dried out and hardened to the consistency of wood. What had preserved him was vitriol, which we now call copper sulfate, that had saturated the water in the tunnel and coated the body completely. Once it evaporated on contact with open air, decay began, but by then the damage was done to anyone who had seen him. His body was put on public display for 30 years. In the 1860s, church renovations uncovered his remains again, and he was displayed once more. He was not given a permanent burial until 1930, more than 2 centuries after he was first pulled from the water. Margareta had spent 42 years not knowing what had happened to the man she was going to marry. When she finally saw him again, he was perfectly preserved at the age he disappeared, and she had grown old without him. The dead had stayed young, the living had not. Hidden chamber. Deep in the forests of Gabon in Central Africa, researchers discovered a hidden underground chamber that had no business existing where it did. Reaching it required lowering themselves nearly 50 feet down through a narrow vertical shaft, with no natural light reaching the bottom at any point. What they found there was the bones of at least 28 people scattered across the floor, alongside hundreds of iron and copper artifacts including jewellery and weapons. Some of the bodies had been arranged in specific positions consistent with deliberate ritual burial. Others were scattered. There is no settlement anywhere near this location. There are no written records referencing it. Nobody knows who these people were, what culture they belonged to, or why they ended up sealed 50 feet underground in the middle of a forest with no surrounding evidence of any community. The entrance is a straight vertical drop with no obvious means of descent, and archaeologists have not been able to determine how the bodies were lowered in without leaving any trace of the process. An unknown quantity of additional artifacts may still be buried in the sediment below the bones. It is one of the most completely unexplained underground discoveries ever made on the African continent. Pre-Incan tomb 1,000 years ago, someone carefully folded a body into a tight-seated position, packed food and clay pots around it, sealed it in the earth, and walked away believing that person would need those things wherever they were going. Last year, a gas pipeline crew in Lima, Peru drilled straight into it. They stopped, called it in, and archaeologists arrived to find 2 tombs sitting silently beneath one of the most densely populated cities on the planet. One was empty. The other had been waiting in the dark for 1,000 years. The burial matched the Chanke culture, a civilization that lived in this region between roughly 1000 and 1170 CE. And the Chanke did not bury their dead lightly. They wrapped their dead in dozens of layers of textile and rope, compressing the body into a massive rigid bundle sometimes 5 feet tall. Then they placed a carefully painted mask over the face, because the Chansey believed the soul needed a face to carry into the afterlife. Without the mask, the dead had no identity on the other side. They would be lost, so every bundle wore one. Lima sits on top of hundreds of sites exactly like this, with 10 million living people going about their daily lives directly above the carefully prepared dead they have never met. But here is what makes this genuinely grim. For centuries, looters known as huaqueros have been tearing through Chanque burial sites, dynamiting tombs open, scattering bones across the ground, and destroying everything that could not be immediately sold. Thousands of sites have been lost this way. Whatever those people wrapped and masked and arranged with such deliberate care has been ripped apart for money and scattered beyond any recovery. The tomb those gas workers found survived only because nobody knew it was there. Auditor, the dog at Berkeley Pit, Montana. The Berkeley Pit in Butte, Montana is one of the most poisonous places in the United States. It is a former copper mine, a mile long and 1,800 feet deep, and since the pumps were switched off in 1982, it has been slowly filling with water so acidic and so saturated with heavy metals that it can dissolve flesh. The government classified it as a Superfund site, meaning it is so contaminated that federal intervention is legally required just to manage it. In 1995, a flock of 342 snow geese landed on the surface during migration. Within days, every single one of them was dead, their internal organs eaten through by the acid, all 342 of them, just from landing on the water. In 1986, a feral dog showed up and decided to live there. Workers named him Auditor because he had a habit of appearing without warning, materializing out of nowhere across grounds that should have been killing him, then vanishing again. He avoided people almost entirely but accepted food and water from the mine workers who took it upon themselves to look after him. When he developed arthritis in his later years, they crushed aspirin into his meals. He survived at the Berkeley Pit for at least 17 years. 17 years in one of the most toxic environments on American soil. Near the end of his life, environmental engineer Holly Peterson collected samples of his hair and sent them for analysis. The results showed that nearly every toxic element imaginable had accumulated in his body. The Idaho silver mine. In 1980, locals near an abandoned silver mine in Idaho began reporting a strange smell drifting from the entrance. A mining inspection team was sent in to investigate. They brought songbirds with them, which was standard practice for testing air quality underground. The moment the birds were carried inside, they fell off their perches. They did not struggle. They did not fly around in distress. They simply dropped instantly the moment they entered. Air testing confirmed dangerously high concentrations of hydrogen sulfide. The levels were so extreme that brief exposure alone could render a person unconscious. The mine had been closed for decades and showed no geological signs that gas should have accumulated anywhere near those levels. The leading explanation was that slowly decaying organic material deep in the lower chambers had created a gas pocket that migrated upward over time, though nobody could adequately explain why the concentration was so severe, or why it had suddenly begun moving toward the entrance. What makes hydrogen sulfide particularly lethal is that at high concentrations it immediately paralyzes the olfactory nerves, meaning the moment the smell disappears, the danger is at its worst. Victims receive no warning. Death can occur in 1 to 2 breaths. In 1950, a hydrogen sulfide blowout in Poza Rica, Mexico killed 22 people and hospitalized over 300 in minutes. Victims were found collapsed mid-stride. The Idaho mine was permanently sealed. During hot summers, locals say the smell still leaks up through the ground. Lovelock Cave, Nevada. In 1965, a cave-in inside the Lovelock Cave mining area in Nevada cracked open a small sealed chamber that had been untouched for thousands of years. Workers assumed the massive bones inside had come from cattle or horses that had somehow fallen from the surface. Archaeologists took one look and knew immediately that was wrong. The bones belonged to giant Pleistocene-era animals, creatures that roamed North America long before any of this was farmland or mine country. Several came from a species of ancient camel. Others came from a giant short-faced bear, and the bear bones were substantially larger than anything from a modern grizzly. The chamber had been sealed so completely that the bones were remarkably well preserved, and on the surrounding stone walls were claw marks, deep gouged claw marks, showing that the animals had been trapped inside while still alive and had died trying to get out. The giant short-faced bear was likely the largest land carnivore in North American history, standing 6 feet at the shoulder and potentially 11 to 12 feet upright, capable of running at 40 miles per hour with a bite force that could crush bone without effort. Early humans arriving in North America would have encountered this animal. They would have been in genuine danger of being eaten by it. And in that sealed chamber, one of them died scratching at stone walls in the dark. Fresh footprints in a sealed mine, Minnesota. In 1974, a mine safety crew entered an abandoned iron mine in Minnesota that had been closed since the 1930s. Every entrance was covered with state-locked steel grates, all of them secured before the team went in. 600 feet underground, one of the inspectors noticed something in the dust on the tunnel floor. It was shoe prints, fresh ones, with edges clean and sharp enough to confirm they had been made within days, not decades. The prints stopped at the edge of the rubble and did not continue. The crew searched for hours. There was no one there. No camping equipment, no water, no tools, no sign that anyone had been living or sheltering underground. Nothing except the prints themselves. On the way out, they checked every entrance again. Every grate was locked exactly as it had been when they arrived. No explanation was ever found for how someone entered a locked mine, walked 600 feet underground, and disappeared at a cave-in without leaving any other trace of their presence. Eyeless animals in an abandoned lead mine, Wales. In 2005, explorers moving through a long-abandoned lead mine in Wales began noticing pale shapes on the ground. They assumed they were looking at pieces of ore or limestone and kept moving. Then the shapes moved back. They had stumbled into a population of albino cave insects and rodents that had adapted entirely to life in complete darkness. The mine had been sealed for decades, long enough for an entire colony to evolve in total isolation, with no human interference and no contact with the surface world. Several of the rodents were missing their eyes completely, not injured, not damaged, but structurally absent, with smooth skulls where the eye sockets should have been. Biologists confirm this as a documented but rare mutation that occurs when animals spend enough generations in total darkness that eyes become not just useless but metabolically wasteful, and the body stops producing them entirely. Even the biologists who later studied the colony described the experience as disturbing. These were mammals, creatures closely related to things that live in fields and walls and kitchen cupboards, moving with complete confidence through absolute darkness in a space where they had no idea anything else existed. The explorers who found them said it made them reconsider what can quietly develop in every abandoned place that humans seal up and walk away from. The ghost town inside Sterling Mine, Oregon. The Sterling Mine in Oregon closed in the 1950s. For decades the entrances collapsed and nobody went back in. Then in 1999, a group of experienced mine explorers pushed through one of the deeper tunnels and found something that stopped them completely. Several hundred feet inside the mountain was a massive open cavern, and inside it, perfectly preserved, was an entire working world. Lockers still standing, handwritten chalkboards, rusted cooking stoves, boots lined up on wooden shelves exactly as someone had left them, a first aid station with supplies still sitting on the table, newspapers from the 1940s still readable. Nobody had packed anything up. Nobody had said goodbye. The cavern had been sealed from sunlight and moisture long enough to freeze everything exactly as it was the last day anyone worked there. The Sunshine Mine disaster in Idaho in 1972 showed how suddenly this could happen. A single underground fire killed 91 miners, and entire communities simply never went back. They left everything. Some places, you don't get the chance to collect your things. The room full of shoes. In 2012, explorers in an abandoned Michigan copper mine pushed open a narrow doorway they had never noticed before. The room inside was 15 by 20 feet, and the entire floor was buried in shoes, thousands of them. Worn leather boots, modern footwear, and among them tiny children's shoes from the early 1900s. Historians explained that miners discarded worn shoes underground to avoid hauling them to the surface, but the numbers didn't add up. There were far more shoes than the mine's entire recorded workforce could account for. Some were ceremonial and decorative, completely unrelated to mining work, which suggested the room predated the copper operation entirely. No explanation was ever agreed upon. The room has since collapsed, making further investigation permanently impossible. Michigan's copper region had children as young as 8 working underground during that era. In 1913, 73 people, most of them children, were trampled to death at a miner's Christmas party in nearby Calumet during a panicked stampede. Those small shoes in that collapsed room carry that history, whether anyone intended them to or not. Mummified man in the mine shaft. In 1976, two teenagers exploring an abandoned mine shaft near Bato, California, found what they assumed was a discarded mannequin slumped against a wall. It was covered in dust and completely dried out. When one of them touched the arm, it was soft. To his shock, it turned out to be a person. Police identified him as a man who had vanished in 1971, 5 years earlier. He had been exploring alone, slipped into a vertical shaft, and the dry desert conditions had preserved him so completely that two teenagers mistook him for a prop. The mine was miles from any road and had no warning signs. There was no way out of the shaft once he fell in. The county sealed the entire mine entrance after the discovery. People in the area still talk about it, not because finding a body in a mine is unheard of, but because of how long he was there, perfectly preserved and completely alone, and nobody knew. Colossal marble head. Rome workers excavating near Trajan's Forum in central Rome were dismantling a medieval wall when they noticed something strange about one of the stones. It had a face, not a decorative carving, a full colossal marble head, thick hair, intense expression, the kind of scale that means whoever this was originally stood as a towering statue over one of the most powerful cities in human history. Someone in the medieval period had found it, decided it was a convenient size and shape, and mortared it into a wall like a brick. Rome's mayor posted about it, describing it as a male face hidden for centuries beneath the Forum Square. The identity is still debated. The features match known portraits of Emperor Trajan, but another similar head found nearby points toward Dionysus, the god of wine. Nobody knows for certain. But here is what is genuinely staggering. This head survived purely by accident, because nobody realized what it was. Historians estimate that less than 1% of all bronze statues from ancient Rome still exist. Medieval populations melted them down for weapons, burned the stone ones in lime kilns for mortar, and used the rubble to build new walls. An entire civilization's artistic legacy, emperors, gods, centuries of craftsmanship was systematically ground into building material by people who simply did not care. What we call Roman art today is the fraction that accidentally slipped through. Everything else is gone forever. Cleopatra's tomb, Egypt. For nearly 20 years, archaeologist Dr. Kathleen Martinez has been searching for the tomb of Cleopatra at the Temple of Taposiris Magna, west of Alexandria. What she has found along the way is extraordinary regardless of whether the tomb is ever located. Excavations have produced a white marble statue of a crowned woman that Martinez believes may show Cleopatra's actual face, though not everyone agrees. They have also recovered 337 coins bearing Cleopatra's image, bronze statues, amulets, oil lamps, and a half-length statue of a king. The temple sits above a vast network of tunnels stretching from Lake Mariut to the Mediterranean. Martinez believes that after Cleopatra and Mark Antony both died, her body was moved secretly through those tunnels and buried with him beneath the temple, hidden deliberately to prevent Rome from finding and desecrating her remains. If she is right, Cleopatra has been lying beneath that temple for over 2,000 years while the world argued about where she was. The snake-faced clay-head archaeologist excavating in Kuwait's Al-Baya desert found a small clay head that immediately unsettled everyone who looked at it. Long skull, slanted eyes, flat nose, and no mouth. It matched the snake person figurines associated with the Ubaid culture, a civilization that existed over 7,000 years ago, making this the first example ever found in the Gulf region. Researchers suggested the elongated shape may have held a wig or headdress, though it could equally be purely symbolic. Nobody knows for certain. What makes the Ubaid figurines as a group so disturbing is their consistency. They appear across a vast region, and they depict not just standing figures but mothers nursing infants, all with the same reptilian features. Nobody has satisfactorily explained what they represent. They predate every major world religion, yet serpent imagery appears prominently in almost all of them. Whether that is coincidence or something older and stranger running underneath human belief systems is a question that remains genuinely open. The lizard people. In the 1930s, a mining engineer named G. Warren Shufelt became convinced that an ancient civilization of lizard people had built a massive underground city beneath modern Los Angeles 5,000 years ago. Not reptilian shapeshifters, but a people who revered the lizard as a sacred symbol and constructed an entire subterranean network in its image, stretching from northeast LA to the Central Library downtown, with tunnels running to the ocean to push fresh air through the chambers. Shufelt claimed to have built a device he called a radio X-ray capable of detecting the tunnels underground and locating a treasure room beneath Fort Moore Hill. He convinced the city of Los Angeles to let him drill a 350-foot shaft in 1934. The dig was abandoned before reaching anything due to cave-in fears and collapsed funding. Shufelt disappeared from public life entirely and died in 1957 with nothing proven. What is strange is that just before he began drilling, a local psychic named Edith Eldon Robinson independently reported a vision of a vast city in mammoth tunnels extending to the seashore. She had no known connection to Shufelt. Nobody has ever explained that.